Tavistock has been involved at every level of social engineering.
The Tavistock Clinic was founded in 1920 and operated as part of the Psychological Warfare Division of the British military. It was initially a voluntary outpatient clinic for treatment and research and was made up of general physicians, neurologists, and psychiatrists to facilitate the treatment of neurosis and shell-shocked British soldiers returning home from World War I.
Going through their own publications on Amazon, you can find that some of their books cost like $18,000, $20,000. And what that tells me is they don't want the average person to be anywhere near getting their hands on this book, because what it gives you inside those books is the teacher's edition, to use an abstraction, as opposed to the students sitting around the class not knowing what the answers to the questions are. There's a group of people who are being given the answers to all the questions about how we act, react, and how we've been understimulated with curiosity in order to make us more subordinative.
You could say much of our world today is the world of the Tavistock Institute and Edward Bernays.
Having been instrumental in the Tavistock Clinic and director of the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, it was former officer and consulting psychiatrist to the British Army, John Rawlings Rees, who created the concept of the psychological shock troops, or culture warriors, a federation of psychiatrists, which he intended to disperse across the globe to make it, quote, possible for people of every social group to have treatment when they need it, even when they do not wish it, without it being necessary to invoke law. The Tavistock Institute's influence did not stop simply at social psychology. Kurt Lewin, former head of Britain's Psychological Warfare Bureau, was a German refugee who became the founder of modern social psychology in the 20th century, an early consultant to the OSS, and an influential researcher with the Tavistock Institute in the area of management thinking and action research, specifically focused on the tactics of managing change within society. No organization of the size and scope of Tavistock can operate for long without ample funding. From whom is that funding derived? Certainly no small part comes from the seemingly benign, tax-exempt foundations of the global elite.
I was researching the Rees Committee back in like 1952, 1953, where they went in and investigated major foundations and some of their subversive activities. These foundations put an enormous amount of energy into controlling what is being taught at the schools and how it's being taught, and using schools basically to indoctrinate children to accept their station in life, to accept a collectivist future.
According to Dr. Lily Kay, whose expertise was demonstrated in her 1993 book, The Molecular Vision of Life, the Rockefeller Foundation, Caltech, and the New Molecular Biology, the world in which we are living has been molded, shaped, and continues to be directed by an elite establishment of eugenicists, a ruling class fueled by violating the will of others to attain their goals.
Nowadays, almost every adult agrees on one basic goal for all students.
Schools ought to turn out good citizens.
Yes, good citizens.
That's right.
Absolutely. This country always needs good citizens.
The real goal was to change America from an individualist system into a collectivist system, and in which case it could be merged with the rest of the world, and there would be this great new world order that we hear so much about in recent years.
The purpose of creating tax-exempt foundations was not just to collect more money, but to invisibly assert influence over the power centers which control the programming of individuals, specifically to breed the self-reliance out of individuals and prepare them for the collectivist lifestyle planned by the ruling class. Their goal: to undermine personal liberty on biological, social, and economic levels.
They came together and decided what they were going to do with this money was to gain control of education in America not for a philanthropic purpose, but to change the thinking of the American people over a generation or two.
The globalist social engineers hungered and desired and coveted the power that the liberty in the U.S. had created. They wanted to take it over, and the tax-free foundations wanted to use it as an engine of global domination, and they've done that. And the Reese committees were the only time when Congress stood up constitutionally and demanded all the big foundations come and testify and open their private books. And the Rockefeller, the Carnegie, the Ford Foundation, they all came and said, look, we're here under presidential directive from more than 50 years ago. We've been told to collectivize the United States, to merge it with the Soviet Union. We've been told to make America more compatible with authoritarian regimes, and we're just doing what we were chartered to do.
Until the creation of language, brute force held the key to fear, and thus to the control of individuals through violence and physical aggression. With the innovation of language, the minds of individuals could be harnessed with ideas and beliefs, making less significant the physical dominance of previous generations. This is how, for example, men of small stature could keep otherwise brave and ferocious gladiators as household slaves, whose deaths could be used for profit and entertainment. Out of the ashes of World War II rose the specter of human experimentation in the form of the 1939 to 1945 exodus of Nazi intelligentsia to continue their research and experimentation under the protection of national security. After being denazified, they were given new identities to live among those against whom they had fought.
We brought Werner von Braun over here and several other scientists, including those that were involved in concentration camp medical experiments, including mind control experiments.
A lot of these guys were, as far as the State Department was concerned, war criminals. They were linked directly to the Nazis and therefore couldn't get visas, couldn't come into the United States. So the CIA set up this series of programs to route everybody around the State Department visa requirements, get them into the country.
Everybody knows about the race at the end of World War II to get Nazi scientists. The Russians wanted them, the United States and England wanted them. And the United States and England got most of them because the Nazis didn't want to go to the Soviet Union, another authoritarian system. They wanted to go to a, quote, freer system. And like an infection, they came to England, Canada, and the United States. And it wasn't just over NASA and rocketry with Werner von Braun and Goddard and others. It was tens of thousands in mind control and torture and military science and surveillance. And the CIA got modeled to a great extent off of the Gestapo. And so we see really the evil of the Nazis being transplanted back to the United States and England, where the eugenics philosophy that they had embraced had originally sprung.
The Office of Strategic Services, the precursor of the CIA, under the direction of William Wild Bill Donovan and Allen Dulles, recruited Nazi scientists and aided their importation into America. Among them were rocket scientist Werner von Braun and the aeronautical physician Hubertus Strughold.
The problem that the United States was facing was there was all these German scientists who were kind of in the wind, loose, wasn't clear where they were going to end up. And the French, the British, the Russians, and the Americans were all trying to recruit them.
The Germans had developed lots of different advanced weapons. And they'd also done a lot of experimentation on human beings in the concentration camps. So they had a lot of medical data that we didn't have. They had, of course, the rocket scientists and the airplane scientists and all of the rest of it. And Paperclip was our version of going into Europe and finding these guys and bringing them to the United States to work.
What we're missing in the documentation, we have physicians, aerospace medicine people, film people, ball bearings, projectile experts, all kinds of scientists. We're missing from the story the psychiatrists. But there must have been psychiatrists brought over, in parallel to Strughold under Paperclip.
German financing came from America, came from Wall Street, and came from American corporations. Even the political support that Hitler got in Germany was, to some extent, traceable to American influences. Prior to World War II, American financiers, banks, corporations, all decided that there was money to be made in pre-war Germany. After all, they all knew that Germany was preparing to become a military aggressor, and it needed money to construct vehicles of war. They were spending a lot of money designing and building tanks and airplanes and military carriers and things like that, submarines, ships, and there was money to be made. And so Wall Street and some of the largest corporations like AT&T and even Ford Motor Company got very much involved with the Nazi regime.
The experiment that went on became known as Nazi Germany starts in World War I and the Versailles Treaty in Paris 1919, basically giving the Germans the short end of the stick, giving them war reparations that they can't possibly pay, totally unrealistic. Now, this famous German banker named Hjalmar Schacht gets together with a guy from the Bank of England named Montague Norman, and they create something in 1932 called the Bank for International Settlements. And they use this as a clearinghouse for all the national debts, but really it's being used to launder money. What you find then is that same group, Hjalmar Schacht, becomes Hitler's banker. So Hitler is totally financed by these people who are making their lives out of pulling the wool over other people's eyes. And at the same time, they want to have the National Socialist experiment to test out the Prussian education system that they are using and about to roll out all over the world.
Following the 1945 completion of Operation Paperclip, the CIA created MK-Ultra, a top-secret mind control research project which was managed by Sidney Gottlieb under the direction of Alan Dulles. The program began in the early 1950s, was officially sanctioned in 1953, and officially terminated in 1973. The program engaged in many illegal, unethical, and immoral activities. In particular, it used unwitting US and Canadian citizens as its test subjects, which led to controversy regarding its legitimacy. MK-Ultra involved the pioneering of many methodologies to manipulate individuals' mental states and alter brain functions, including the surreptitious administration of psychoactive drugs and other chemicals, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, and other various forms of torture.
When I interviewed John Marks about Search for the Manchurian Candidate, he said a very interesting thing to me. He had been given 10 boxes of CIA information on a Freedom of Information Act request, not his first. He had been trying to get this kind of information on the mind control program of the CIA in the 50s, 1950s, for a long time. And finally, as a kind of a sop, maybe even a joke, they gave him 10 boxes of materials that had nothing to do with the projects except the accounting data, the financial data, thinking that Marx wouldn't be able to do anything with it and CIA would be perceived to have fulfilled the FOIA request. But Marx was too smart for them. He saw into the financial data and realized what he had his hands on, that this was not only MK-Ultra, mind control program of the CIA, but it was divided up into many, many, many sub-projects. And he had some of the funding details that provided the foundation for him to move forward in his research and discover what they were really up to.
The military started the Artichoke Project and the Bluebird projects, which I think was the Navy one, and they were trying to figure out, can we make a Manchurian Candidate? Can we make a super soldier? Can we control what people think and do and how they act on the battlefield? Can we make somebody braver than they really are? And it was getting up to where they were asking questions, can we create kamikazes like the Japanese had?
In 1994, President Clinton created the Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments, which was tasked with investigating the instances of federally funded research using ionizing radiation on human beings. Based on the documents made available to the committee, they identified nearly 4,000 cases of human radiation experiments taking place between 1944 and 1974. This